Hello students! In today's lecture we're going to talk about parenting styles and discipline. Parenting styles and discipline is part of module 3, and after we cover this content in today's lecture, next week we're going to begin with maternal and paternal health. Also remember that you will have exam 1 that will be released next week, so be on the lookout for that. Make sure that you're studying on time, you're keeping current with watching all of the lectures, studying the PowerPoints, making notes on your supplemental reading materials, are not falling behind. Again, let me remind you, this is a summer course, so everything is very fast-paced, and you will fall behind if you're not proactive in making sure that you're studying every single day and making sure that you are on top of everything. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me through my MySFA email address or through my D2L email address. I do prefer being contacted through the MySFA email address. That has been written down on my D2L contact information page as well, and on the syllabus as well. So let's get started with today's lecture. Before I begin talking about parenting styles and disciplines, I want to take a little bit of look into the history of behavioral psychology and how that really helps us understand parenting styles and parenting disciplines. So I want to talk about two very important figures, two very important behavioral psychologists, one by the name of J.B. Watson. J.B. Watson basically came up with his work in the early 1920s, and what he did was come up with this theory that was called classical conditioning. Now, all of you who took the Intro to Psychology course are familiar with what classical conditioning is. If not, I encourage you to do a quick Google search on that. It's very easy. If you have any questions, you can also ask me about that. But J.B. Watson came up with explaining human behavior through classical conditioning. And when he did that, he completely ignored the presence of a mind. So J.B. Watson ignored the presence of the mind, whereas B.F. Skinner acknowledged the presence of the mind. But he just thought it was more productive in order to understand human behavior, it was more productive to study the observable behavior rather than the internal mental events. And Skinner's work is actually rooted in the view that classical conditioning was far too simplistic to be a complete explanation of the complex human behavior. He believed that the best way to understand that behavior was to look at the causes of an action and its consequences. And that is what he called theory of operant conditioning that he came up with in 1948. When we talk about theory of operant conditioning, it basically is a theory that deals with the operant, the stimulus, which could be positive or negative. And the idea behind the theory was that the behavior is determined by mostly its consequences, and that behavior can be reinforced by either incentives or punishment. So B.F. Skinner's take was, in explaining human behavior, was completely environmental, that the human behavior was completely subjected to environmental cues and feedback from the environment. And that takes us to our next slide about positive and negative reinforcement, and how did he describe those and how did he use those. So positive reinforcement is exactly what it sounds like. It strengthens a behavior by providing a feedback by providing a feedback or a consequence that an individual will find rewarding. And let me give you a couple of examples in order to explain this further. In this particular aspect, the individual engages in the behavior and something really good happens, that they feel, they've been rewarded for that behavior. So as a result, they keep doing it. Example would be for a toddler that earns a sticker every time they successfully put something up. Rather it be a pair of shoes or, once they play with their toys, picking after themselves. So what they associate is the chore or doing completion of that task with earning that sticker, and that is positive reinforcement for them. Negative reinforcement works in a similar way, where it strengthens a behavior because it stops or removes an unpleasant experience. So there's reduction in something bad that's happening. And I have two examples for you, two very, very relevant examples. The first one is of a teenager who leaves their clothes laying down in their bedroom floor, their closet, and that makes the parent very upset and very frustrated because they have to pick up after them. So the teenager connects the dots and they say, the days when I pick up after myself, my mother, for example, is not as upset or is not as frustrated, so I'm going to continue to do that in order to make sure that she does not get upset with me. So you see that she associates that action with the consequence of the parent not getting upset. Similarly, for a student, lack of studying caused a student to, fail an exam. So the student associated their action, which was not studying, with the bad consequence, which was earning a failing grade on the exam. So the next time, the students make sure to study so that they don't receive a failing grade. So do you see how exactly positive and negative reinforcement plays a role? And it's really important to understand those to make sure we can differentiate between different types of parenting disciplines and how they play a role in different kinds of outcomes in a child, behaviorally speaking. I have a really nice scenario in this slide, and it again goes into a little bit more detail on positive and negative reinforcement. Imagine your younger self that is trying to smoke for the first time. Now, this by no means is a cue or encouragement for you to pick up smoking. Do not pick it up now. But just imagine, for the sake of this scenario, that you tried to pick up smoking, and the main consequence of you doing that, you were in high school at that point in time, and the main consequence was that you got to really hang out with the popular crowd that you always wanted to hang out with at school, and you got to make some new friends, and your social gathering, your social status really improved. And if you analyze that situation, what exactly has happened? You have been positively rewarded for an action, and thus you're likely to repeat that behavior. Similarly, if the main consequence was negative, where somebody found out about it, reported to the school's administration, the school therefore punished you, suspended you, your parents became involved, they punished you at home. And if you analyze that situation, now you've received a punishment for an action, so you're less likely to do it in order to make sure the same sequence of action does not repeat, or the same sequence of consequences don't repeat for your action, which was smoking. So the huge problem, I mean, it makes perfect sense, right? It makes great sense. It's like, oh yeah, every action is backed up by a consequence, but there is a problem with B.F. Skinner's theory. And what was the huge problem? Was that Skinner tried it on animals such as mouse, dogs, dolphins, to determine their feeding patterns. And that's how he was able to tell that these were learned behaviors. And he was applying the same principle to human behavior. Now, there's a huge difference here. And, if you can tell, he used in his experimentation animals, and he was applying the data, the analysis that he received from research through animals directly on humans without any human testing. So that exactly was a huge flaw with his theory. And Skinner actually argued that humans were no different than animals, and that they could be trained through the delivery of new subject matter with a series of, graduated steps, and making sure that there's a feedback at the end of each stage. Now, let me ask you a question. How exactly do human differs from animal? Two differences that I can think of is that we can think, we can disagree, we can wonder, we can also respond to instincts. Now, what the problem was that B.F. Skinner did not necessarily address the human and animal differences in his theory, and he really underplayed the overall role that biology played in forging and regulating human behavior. And what do I mean by biology? It is our DNA. He completely underplayed the role of our genetics and our DNA in regulating human behavior. And he tried to explain every behavior via his theory without considering genetics or cognitive brain development. And as per his theory, humans couldn't really think, right? They were just like animals. They responded to feedback. They responded to, consequences, either it be positive or negative, and environmental cues, and that was completely false. And that is why theory of operant conditioning only does part of the job of explaining human behavior, because we're not animals. Now, we're talking about all of these behavioral psychology and all of these theories, and you may ask, well, how does it really relate to our current topic, which is parenting styles and disciplines? And you have to understand that when B.F. Skinner talked about all of those things, he was really trying to explain human behavior and human trait. And human trait is, if you look right here in this particular graph, human trait can be explained by environment by about 51%, but by genetics about 49%. So human trait is formed half and half between genetics and between environment. And parenting styles are important because they impact that human trait through genetics and both through the environment. There was a study that was done on twins that revealed that both genetics and the environments have roughly equal influence on the human traits, and that it is parenting style that determines largely the kind of environment that the child will be raised in. And psychologists were able to, categorize that data and put it into four different parenting styles. So four major groups of parenting styles. So the reason we talk about how human traits are developed and how human traits are formulated is to really understand what role does parenting style, the environment that the child is raised in, plays in developing his or her human traits and thus impacting their overall life. And that is the connection point between all the stuff that we talked about right before this slide. Diana Baumrind actually developed four different types within 1966. And those were authoritative, authoritarian, neglectful, and permissive. Now, I really like Baumrind's 3 parenting styles module because it really helps me determine what are the basic traits for each parenting style. If you look at authoritarian right here, okay, and that's the first one over there. Authoritarian has a very high demandingness from the parental side and low responsiveness. Whereas authoritative has high demandingness and high responsiveness. And if you go right here, permissive, this is a third type of parenting style. It has high responsiveness but very low demandingness. And then when you come to the neglectful, that has low demandingness and also very low responsiveness. So if you look right here, there are 2 ways for us to really measure each parenting style and evaluate it on the scales: demandingness and responsiveness. What is demandingness really referred to? It is the control that a parent exerts on their child's behavior or demanding their maturity in terms of their behavior. And responsive is the parental duty to accept the child, to be sensitive to their needs, and to really understand and communicate with them at all times. So what we're really going to do is go through all 4 of these parenting styles. Again, pay very close attention to them and take good notes, detailed notes on those, as they make excellent, as again, they make very good exam questions. So authoritarian, some of the very key characteristics of this parenting style is its accepting of corporal punishment. It's strict in controlling child, and it really utilizes this mindset of one must do or a child must obey because I said so. So the saying of because I said so is more commonly used in this particular parenting style. And it often reacts negatively when asked for explanation. So when a parent is asked for an explanation, the parent might not be able to communicate that and may react negatively and may respond with that the child must do everything I asked them to do because I said so or because I am in that parental position. There's also a control of behavior or a child's behavior by using punishment and threats. Punishment and constant usage of threat really puts the child at a high anxiety level where they're not really able to relax or not really able to deeply connect with the parent because they're constantly facing, they're constantly in their environment where there is a threat of losing something, whether it be his favorite toy, or whether it be a trip to a favorite place, whatever it may be. But there's always that environment where a child is constantly facing that. And the authoritarian parents tend to not be warm to the child's needs. They may love the child very much and often say that they're strict out of love, but they're using corporal punishment such as caning or flogging to really get the child to obey. And that does not necessarily work out in child's benefit. Now let's talk about corporal punishment and what does it really mean. Corporal punishment may have, like I said, it can be expressed in terms of caning or flogging or hitting. And it may have short-term desirable outcomes for the authority. For example, a child may listen if they're not listening, or a child may do the desired behavior. They may comply after spanking, but there are long-term implications with the corporal punishment. And 3 of those implications are it builds up aggression in children and expression of that aggression physically as well. Resolving conflict is also done through aggression or expression of aggression. It also increases physical abuse among children and symptoms of depression that display even during adulthood. So let's talk about those implications in a little bit more detail. Aggression in children. Physical punishment actually engenders more aggression in the child, even if it initially appears to stop that behavior. So even if there is a certain pause to the undesirable behavior to begin with, it is building up that aggression that will be displayed down the road. And the problem is that kids cannot differentiate between an unacceptable physical aggression and physical aggression for which they receive a punishment. They kind of think of both of them being equal. Also, physical abuse. Adolescents who receive physical punishment are actually 3 times more likely to grow up to abuse their own children. And spanking, what it teaches a child is that it's okay to hurt people to get a desired outcome. This can cause a misconception as well that problems can be resolved by hitting or usage of physical force. And the last one was symptoms of depression that displays even during adulthood. And there's a study that was done on college campuses where students were surveyed on receiving corporal punishment as a child, and a high percentage of students who receive angry corporal punishment also suffered from symptoms of depression as young adults. So that tells you how mental health outcomes are really impacted by the usage of punishment, corporal punishment specifically, during childhood. Now, authoritarian. I really love these graphics and I've used them for each one of the parenting styles. It sums up exactly what are the key traits for the parenting style and its associated outcomes. It is also a great way to study this particular, it is a great way to study the parenting styles as well. So let's look at it in a little bit more detail. In this parenting styles, you see the parent being unresponsive. They have very strict rules, high expectations, and expecting blind obedience. Now let's look at some of the outcomes right here. The associated outcomes is that it leads to lower academic performances, also poor social skills, development of mental illness, low self-esteem, substance abuse, and etc. Furthermore, the child gets better behaved. They do get into less trouble. They do follow rules within the authoritarian parenting style. But they're also more likely to experience depression and mental health problems, social problems in later in life. And there's this constant pressure that they face to achieve more compared to others, with an ingrained perception of self-inadequacy, that I'm not really good enough, so I must always try to achieve more than I have, try to do more than I have done. And then also impacts their performance, whether it be at work or at school, and they tend to have lower academic performances due to being in that constant stress, which then decreases their self-esteem. So they also avoid undesirable behavior only when the controlling authority is around. So they're unable to have that self-control for the undesirable behavior in the absence of the authority. Now let's look at permissive parents. These are nurturing, warm, responsive parents, but they rarely impose limits. They're very likely to discuss the desired behavior of what a child should do, but they don't really focus on how the child can get there, and they don't also force the child to behave because it's right. They believe they believe that the child should be allowed to make their own mistakes. They should be independent. And thus they should control their own behavior. At an early age, that may not work out well because the child is easily able to extend their limits or deadlines, and there's also usually no consequences because the parent tends to give in everything. So just like authoritarian parenting style, we also have an infographic for the permissive parenting style, and it includes key parenting traits followed with the associated outcomes. So let's look at those. The direct outcomes for the child's health is that child misbehaves more. He or she watches more TV and plays more video games. There are definite problems with substance use and abuse, so alcohol and drugs, and the child engages in risky behaviors. The child is unable to keep steady relationships during adulthood. For instance, we see a high rate of divorce, fallouts, partner abuse, and domestic violence among children who were raised in a permissive parenting style, under a permissive parenting style. The third type of parenting style is the uninvolved parents. And these parents are very low in both warmth and control. So they're low in responsiveness, they're low in demandingness, going back to our earlier slide. And this parental figure really comes across as someone who's not interested in the child, just not interested in their well-being, not interested in their progress. It could be that the parent might be depressed and suffering from some mental health issue of their own, and engaging in substance abuse, and thus are not being able or not emotionally available to be a parent. However, the outcomes are not good for the child. Whatever the reason may be, the child will not thrive in this environment. So if you look at the infographic, doesn't that really make you sad, that particular picture right there? If you look at the parenting style, the first key trait is that the parent is cold and unresponsive. There are little to no rules, and the parent is uninvolved and is also indifferent. If you notice that the uninvolved parent parenting style is also known as neglectful parenting style. So those go hand in hand, and I'll accept either or for the exam. The associated outcome, let's look at those in a little bit of more detail. So you see impulsive behavior within the child, you see delinquency, you see drug or alcohol abuse, and this last one right here makes me very sad, is you see high suicide rates among children and adolescents, those who have been raised in a very neglectful or an uninvolved parenting, under an uninvolved parenting style. Now we can go ahead and start talking about the authoritative parents. So before I jump into details about this particular parenting styles, let me tell you this. Amongst the all four, authoritative parenting style is the gold star parenting style, where there is a high demandingness from the parent and also high responsiveness by the parent. And within this parenting style, there is a strong parental control, and warmth is given importance. That emotional availability is given importance. The parent sets limits, provides the reasons for limits, and the parent is also very warm and respectful in the relationship. We also see the usage of inductive discipline amongst the authoritative parents. And what exactly does that mean? Inductive discipline is when you ask a child to change a behavior, you follow it up with reasoning. You provide them an explanation on how it really affects others, and how the world is a cohesive network where it's not just about them, it's also about the others who are connected to them. So usage of inductive discipline really promotes this moral development among the child in an early age and allows them to see how they're connected to their environment and how an action might not just impact them, but also their environment. And as far as the infographic is concerned, it gives us some really clear traits for this parenting style. The parent is warm and responsive. They have clear rules. They have high expectations. They're supportive. And they also value independence. It's not just all about the parent. They support and value independence. And as far as the associated outcomes are concerned, in this particular parenting style, we see higher academic performances in the child. We see that the child has a higher self-esteem. They value themselves more. They have better social skills. There is also lesser incidence of mental health illnesses during adolescence and during adulthood, and also lower delinquency rates. Now, one might ask that if it's all about communication, as far as all the parenting styles are concerned, how can you nurture communication? What is the best way to foster and facilitate communication? And one of the ways behavioral psychologists recommend to do this is through establishing a safe zone where you provide a child with an opportunity to confess without really any negative consequences. And how you do it is that you tell a child beforehand that you can share any kind of knowledge with you as long as they say the term safe zone. They'll not get into trouble. And what it really allows you to do is establish this trust between the child and the parent. And it also provides the child with an opportunity to be able to tell the truth, to be able to communicate without having fear, without having anxiety of getting into trouble. Now, children and young adults should feel safe to talk to each other. So children should feel safe to be able to talk to their parents and guardians and be able to share sensitive information. And having established ritual for safe zone really helps both parties communicate better. Now, you have to be careful to not let a child just get away with anything as long as they say safe zone. So you have to keep a very good balance in between. Study that was done by Dr. Samuel and Pearl Oleiner, and they wondered why some Germans collaborated with Nazis and why others, risked their lives to save Jews. So why some were bystanders and why the others were the rescuers. And they interviewed those individuals, and what it revealed was a trend and a difference of parenting styles. Now pay close attention to this. Collaborators mostly received corporal punishment, and they had to adhere to blind obedience as a child because I said so. These were also the individuals who helped the Nazis in their agenda against the Jews. Now, connect the dots. These individuals were raised in an environment where corporal punishment was a norm. They were raised in an environment where someone expected blind obedience from them because they were in the authoritative position or leadership position. And thus, they also responded in the same way as adults when a country leader expected that kind of obedience from them, that blind obedience. Then we had the bystanders. This group mostly received corporal punishment, but they were not really raised in an environment where blind obedience was expected. And we see a similar outcome amongst this group of people where they saw everything that happened, but they didn't respond as rescuers. Neither did they collaborate with the Nazis. They just stood there and they saw and they didn't make a motion. So bystanders were, connecting the dots again, these were the individuals who are raised in an environment where corporal punishment was the norm, so they received it. But fortunately, they didn't have an environment where blind obedience was an expectation as well. So thus, they did not also end up becoming collaborators. And then we had the third group of rescuers, who did not receive corporal punishment when they were being as children. And they were often explained why certain behaviors were wrong. So thinking back to the previous slide, inductive discipline that was utilized in raising this group of individuals. They were taught the more acceptable ways of behaving. So reasoning, they were taught reasoning. And this group of individuals ended up becoming the rescuers. It's a really cool way to see how parenting styles within the same nation applied in 3 different groups of people gives us 3 different kinds of groups, or so different in their action. Now, parenting in the 21st century definitely has its challenges. We have to address those challenges in order to make sure that effective parenting does take place. So what are some of those challenges? The first challenge that I would like to talk about is being able to teach self-control and delayed gratification to children. Once again, unfortunately, we live in a time and an age where almost everyone is obsessed with the idea of instant gratification, with the idea of being validated instantly. And that makes teaching self-control very difficult. We also have to address how differently do we prepare children for adulthood in 21st century and how that has changed from the past, and the importance of family and how that really helps strengthen parenting. So what I want to talk about is a marshmallow experiment. What exactly is the marshmallow experiment? At Stanford, there were 2 psychologists who did this study and named it the marshmallow experiment that really examined delayed gratification. And how they did the study, it was really simple. What they did was they recruited a whole bunch of 4-year-olds and they offered them one marshmallow. And they also told them that if they waited for 15 minutes, a short period of time, they'll get another marshmallow. The only condition was that they can't eat that first marshmallow until that 15-minute period is over. And they noticed and observed the actions of children after having the complete pieces of information and what they chose to do. And what they did was they followed that cohort of children that they had recruited at an early age and followed them for decades to really determine the outcomes and how delayed gratification played a role in their lives. And what they saw was children who did choose to wait for an additional 15-minute period just so that they could get that second marshmallow had vastly different outcomes compared to the other group who chose not to wait. How do we see those? They had better emotional coping skills, this group of individuals. And again, this was a longitudinal study, so this data was collected over decades and thus speaks volume about how strong it could be. So let's talk about the outcomes again. They saw better emotional coping skills among that group. They saw higher rates of educational attainment of higher degrees. They also saw better chances of starting and finishing higher degrees. So if you initiated college, you finished it. So better chances of those versus the other group. they saw higher SAT scores. How could that possibly be related? So think of it, delayed gratification, not wanting to get instantly validated. That ties in with being able to study effectively, where you don't want to, check your phone every 5 minutes, where you don't want to look and see what's happening around you every 30 minutes, and you're really able to focus, engage into what you're doing. So higher SAT scores. They also had lower BMI rates, lower basal metabolic index. And what does that really mean? Lower BMI rates, so they're able to control what they eat and how they eat and their overall eating habits. We also saw relationship-wise, this group did a lot better. They had lower divorce rates and they had lower rates of addiction. So if you just heard about the marshmallow experiment, I understand what that may sound like. That some individuals were just born amongst the two group of students or two groups of children. One had poor self-control and one had really good self-control. And what if you had bad self-control? The thing was that Walter and his research associates continued to alter the marshmallow test, and they learned that children can actually learn to control when they were showed how to. The children are like sponge. When they're showed how to do something, they tend to replicate that. So in other words, self-control and delayed gratification, yes, they're essential life skills, and it's great when children are born with that. But if you're not, that's completely okay, because it can be learned. This lack of automatic self not have to determine your entire life trajectory, because you can learn it. Now, teaching self-control, why is this so important? Again, because among children, it prevents them from engaging into risky behavior as they grow older, whether it be substance abuse, addiction, risky sexual behavior. It also educates and strengthens children and enhances their moral development. And little to no self-control actually allows students and children to be, really frustrated, really indecisive with their life, and be really disorganized overall. So family is a self-society and is an important aspect of, overall parenting and effective parenting. Having a strong family is critical for effective parenting and delivery of effective parenting and parenting discipline. And just simply by living side to side, we develop these skills where we learn to relate with each other. We learn to become better listeners, share. We learn to be patient. We learn to respect each other and have respect for each other's common core values, each other's beliefs. We learn to forgive on mistakes. And most importantly, we learn to love. However, what is the threat to today's family? What I see are the challenges is the electronic devices, the overflow of electronic devices in every way, in every form, from a computer to now an iPad to a cell phone to an Apple Watch. All of this together, what it really I see is doing is preventing dialogue, which then stalls family's growth. And I'm going to give you a very easy example. One of my biggest pet peeves at my house is when everyone has their phones out at the dinner time, because it prevents dialogue. It prevents from everyone to communicate with each other and connecting with each other, and then it prevents, most importantly, is the development of that deep bond that should exist between family members. It's Thursday, so by today you should have some deadlines in place for when exactly are deliverables due for each other, for group members, what responsibilities are assigned to each other, so that you are ready to submit this assignment early on and also ask questions next week. And that brings us to next week. We will cover Module 4 is going to be over maternal and paternal health. So we'll have that lecture posted for you on Monday. And also Exam 1 is going to be released next week. So making sure that you are keeping up with studying material and not falling behind. Other than that, that sums up our lecture for today. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to contact me, and I'll talk to you on Monday.